Welcome to the Gender Finance Podcast. In this series, we sit down with finance leaders to hear their stories. Get ready for honest conversations, fresh insights, and inspiring perspectives on the future of finance and the role of women in shaping it.
Welcome to this episode of the Gender Finance Podcast. My name is Simon Gorbett. I'm Deputy CEO at Luxembourg for Finance, which is the agency for the development of the Financial Centre. I'm also fortunate to be involved with the Gender Finance Task Force under the auspices of the Ministry of Finance in Luxembourg. And I'm very pleased to be joined today in the studio by Micaela Forelli. Micaela, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you here today. Thanks so much for coming in for this chat. Micaela, you're CEO of Mgmt Investments in Luxembourg. You're also Vice President of EFAMA, and I'd love to come on to that in a bit more detail later on. Perhaps rather than me introducing you, you could take us through your career journey, and I'd love to hear if there have been any particular pivotal moments or mentors or role models that have shaped that for you.
When reflecting on my professional journey, it really starts long before my first formal role. Mm-hmm. Business is somewhat part of my DNA. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family in the north of Italy, in Lombardy, in one of the most entrepreneurial regions in Europe. And since the start, business was everything I saw around me, my family, and had a lot of female role models as well. Women who were a part of the startups and the continuation, the evolution, and the adaptation of businesses, and work very hard to run the family businesses. So leadership was sort of natural in my first personal years as well. Then I was very fortunate. I could follow studies in the areas of my interest. I've always been number focused. And that allowed me early on to have exposure to obviously studies, but also companies that were internationally oriented and also finance-focused roles. Later on, I was also blessed with having the chance to access companies that were innovative, and always focused on diversity. Also, focused on progressing by merit, by diversity of thought, and that gave me the chance in those companies, but also in the university and in the schools I studied in, to appreciate diversity of thought and gender as a leadership trait as well. Later on in my career, what helped in the professional journey was broad exposure to different functions. I started my career in pure finance roles, so administration, finance, corporate finance, CFO type roles, but then evolved into relationship management for financial institutions, but also sales, clients. Mm-hmm. And strategy as well, and that allowed me to broaden the leadership style and also to understand how decisions connect in different functions in an organization, and more lately in boards and regulated roles that further sharpened my style in leadership, balancing the challenge to companies together with the support, and also really fully understanding that you need a set of diverse contributions to be successful. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I felt in my journey that leadership builds through time, but also builds through trust, performance, which obviously go beyond gender, which is a bit of the topic of today.
And that's so interesting that even from a very early age, entrepreneurship was part of the sort of the family DNA. Have some of these experiences then that you've been fortunate to have they changed your approach to developing talent in others?
I think so. One of the aspects I care a lot about is process and systems. So it's not only about intentions, especially also not about optics. It needs to be really embedded in how we do. So for me, as a manager, as a leader, now as a CEO of a company, and also in my board roles, I think sustainability and diversity are part of a leadership imperative.
Sure.
And the way I look at this is to make sure that we have systems and processes that help the good intentions and the good thinking, and they can be measured. In that sense, at MNG Investments, we have very strong commitments. We have scorecards of performance in these topics. We have tracked records, and we gave ourselves targets. They are clearly measurable. We have a target of 45% of female leadership in senior positions.
Is this linked to, because you're also a signatory of the Women in Finance Charter in Luxembourg?
Correct.
So, and that of course requires firms to make certain commitments and also be transparent on an annual basis about how that's progressing. So how are you implementing those in say, operations, investments?
Yes, for sure. They are connected, and we were very happy and continued our commitment not only here in Luxembourg but across the pan-European scene on gender diversity charters, but also national charters about diversity. The way we can track it is assess year on year, and particularly in the operativity of it, we need to follow the whole cycle. So we need to make sure that we have a sufficient pipeline of diverse candidates, both in interviews and then in the allocation of the roles. It needs to be obviously based on merit, on skills, on competencies and capabilities, but making sure that you have enough CVs that come from example for diverse pools, or using agencies or recruiters that also know what are the parameters and keep it balanced. Then later on in the cycle, when colleagues are with us, it's very important to make sure that the talent development is first of all making sure that it's diverse enough so that we continue to progress a sufficient number of people in different genders, but not only. We have targets also for ethnicity, for an example, and other targets we gave ourselves. So making sure that development of talent is continuously supported as diverse and inclusive, and also making sure that we have policies which at MNG we have some policies, for example, for parental support, which also won some awards, and allow our population of male and female colleagues to take time for their family without hopefully losing out in the career progression, because we track that. And then there is the aspect of the ongoing training and ongoing sensitization in these topics. So we make our commitment internationally, we make sure we speak about our commitments, and we constantly track them, including at board levels, remuneration committee levels, including at non-executive and executive levels.
And in terms of that flexibility that you give staff, you're essentially adding flexibility beyond the minima that are given by the law.
Yes, yes. And at least we make sure that in every jurisdiction we operate, if the law doesn't give enough of the flexibility that we have established in our policy, we adequate it.
Okay. So if we step out into the sector that we're in this conversation, asset management, I read a statistic the other day that said that the proportion of women portfolio managers globally is 12%, which is not particularly high. What sort of responsibility do you feel that firms like M&G have to encourage women into those decision-making roles, particularly given that important role that portfolio managers have in the allocation of capital, for example?
Yes, yeah. Statistically, at the global level, your figures are what we read as well. So it's a very small percentage. It's 12%. At the European level, I think Morningstar was assessing a similar figure. So there is a lot of ground to cover. What's striking to me when we look at asset management, in particularly as a sector, is that there is quite a good pool of investment talent in our organizations. It's just that these figures apply to who leads funds.
Okay.
So what we can see, what we can say is that the challenge is to get women fund managers or diverse fund management roles into the leadership positions for portfolios.
Okay, so you might have diverse teams, but the leadership is not.
Yes, yeah. So it's more how we can allow our colleagues in investment teams to then get into the decision making, like you say, into the capital allocation lead position, rather than just being part of the entry into the profession. The entry into the profession is happening more and more. Is how we facilitate that. At M&G, we see that our commitments, what we spoke about before, our policies, but also our belief into this shows through representation. So we have already senior leaders in our organization in various parts of the business. So our chief financial officer for group is a lady. Other ladies colleagues head up key markets for M&G, like Asia Pacific, like France, like Switzerland. Europe, I'm here, and then we have Iberia also is led for us by a female colleagues. And that gives a strong indication to others that there is a path and it's supported by the company. The same happens in investments. And we have in particular our Chief Investment Officer for Equities, Multi-Asset and Sustainability, a lady named Fabiana Fedeli, who is a particularly strong example in that she leads a team of 150, more or less 150 investment professionals, and she ensures that all the steps that we have been speaking about, so diverse talent pools, progression, talent development support, is supported, is fostered in her teams. So we have teams that are high performing, very, very good, strong track records in terms of investment performance, but also in terms of collaboration and in terms of the rounded output of what we do as fund managers.
Yeah, that's really encouraging to hear. And this conversation around representation of women higher up in the organization, of course, is key. Perhaps you have particular perspectives from the European side. So you were named as Vice President of EFAMA, the European Fund and Asset Management Association, last year. For anyone who doesn't know, that's essentially the voice of the 30 trillion euro European investment management industry. And I think, in fact, that's the first time that EFAMA has had a fully female presidency in its 52-year history.
Yes.
So that's excellent. With that perspective, does that give you, what does it teach you or show you about how asset management stacks up against perhaps other industries in terms of female representation at more senior levels? And are you getting messages from Brussels, for example, on this?
Yes. My role as vice president at EFAMA gives me quite a broad view on the European asset management industry. And again, I think there has been a significant progress in our industry. So investment management, asset management is expressing more female talent in leadership roles, not only. And there is a high sensitivity to it. What you made as an example of the first all-female presidency composed by Samantha Ricciardi and myself, we got elected last year, is a good example of that, for sure. I think it happened after circa 50 years of the association existence, and it gives a very strong signal. At the same time, comparing, when you mention comparison with other financial services industry sectors, I think asset management can do more. But there is also a general shift coming from regulation, for example, that will help this transition. So from the perspective of EFAMA, we could witness already the directives like the Women on Boards Directive. It will come into force with some particular targets by June of this year. And we will see, or we are already seeing actually, changes in the way that succession planning is planned for, and also talent development, and obviously the rules will help the shift further. Broader than boards, the EU roadmap for women's rights is also another initiative of the European Union that shows that there is a strong intention to help the transition happen. So I think from Brussels the message is pretty clear, is that leadership balance is an imperative from a governance and a business point of view.
And you say that more needs to be done. Something that you've said before is, and I quite like it, you say gender is not a theme. And I think I know where you're going with that, but tell us more about why you say that.
Yeah, when I say gender is not a theme, I mean that if we look at gender or other characteristics of a human being or a professional, we then are bound to the risk of marginalizing those elements. I sometimes give the example or say that it's a little bit like the panda effect, the effect of putting, in this case, women into a particular rare species that has to be
sort of project or initiative.
Exactly, not mainstream, but something that has to be safeguarded particularly. And there is a similar, I think, tendency, especially in the recent years, with sustainability in general. And to me, treating that as a theme has a very big risk of associating it with fashions. So it's a theme today, cannot be a theme tomorrow, and also to sideline it. So I think that the key there is to make sure that it becomes mainstream. It's not highlighted, it's not sidelined, it is at the core of what we do in management and leadership. It's one of the many characteristics of thinking differently, being inclusive, and essentially giving balance and an all-rounded contribution.
So it needs a reframing potentially to make sure that it's not just seen as a moral obligation, but also it makes economic sense and could ultimately be existential if we don't capitalize properly on the talent that's there.
Yes.
Well, we're coming towards the end of our session. You probably know that on the podcast we have a feature where we ask each guest to ask a question to the next. So if I can, I'd like to ask you a question that was posed by our previous guest. That was Brenda Boll. She is country head, as you know, of Seka Bank in Luxembourg. And she asked the following. She said, given the current geopolitical environment, and with some countries retreating in some way from DEI. How do you see diversity and inclusion evolving in, say, the next 10 years?
Maybe some of my answers already revealed my thinking and surely my spirit, which is I don't see it retreating in a meaningful way, because it is part of who we are, and it is very much evidenced that performance comes from a balanced mix of factors. It's true that there are political pushes and preferences, especially in some parts of the world. Again, to put this as a fad, as a theme, but given regulation is evolving towards supporting the transition, there is plenty of evidence that performance, and not only sustainable performance, economic performance, investment performance, come from very well-balanced mix of factors.
Yeah, the business case is there.
Absolutely. So businesses, I think, realize that it is an imperative, and when there is a combination of financial outcomes as well as sustainability outcomes, I think that it will continue to hold and develop in a more revolutionary way.
Yeah, well, I'm encouraged to hear that you don't see it retreating. Of course, so now you have the privilege of asking the next guest your question. We don't know who that next guest is going to be.
Okay.
So the floor is yours, and the check is blank. What would you like to ask?
So I thought about asking the next question, if you had to share an anecdote that shows how women bring a unique perspective into risk assessment and resilience building, what would the example be?
Excellent, a concrete example. I look forward to hearing that from the next guest. Excellent. Well, Micaela, thank you so much for taking us on the journey all the way from the beginning to today, to 10 years in the future even. It's been an absolute privilege to speak with you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much.
We'll speak soon. And to everyone watching and listening, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the Gender Finance podcast, whether on Spotify or Apple Music. And also check out the Gender Finance website at gender-finance.com. And we'll see you next time.